The process of applied functional science is the transformation of the notion into the motion.
From the Gray Institute, I'm John, and this is the Gray Institute podcast. Gray Institute is internationally acclaimed for its innovation, development, mastery, and delivery of applied functional science, AFS. AFS is based on scientific truth, not theory, of how the human body moves in all three planes. AFS allows movement professionals like you to apply the best, most effective, and most efficient movements to any individual based on specific needs and goals. For 40 years, through training, education, and mentorship, Gray Institute has equipped over 150,000 professionals with comprehensive knowledge in the principles of applied functional science. Whether you are physical therapists, personal trainers, athletic trainers, chiropractors, strength and conditioning coaches, physicians, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, osteopaths, physical therapy assistants, or kinesiologists, our goal is to help you become the go-to movement professional. The Gray Institute podcast is questions-based. You send in your questions and we'll discuss them. If you're listening and have questions, email them to info@grayinstitute.com. We join Gary as he discusses optimal body movement and function for our clients.
From Gray Institute, I'm Gary Gray, and welcome once again to the Gray Institute podcast. I'm excited to be with you today because we have a number of great questions and hopefully some answers that will stimulate some thought and some curiosity. And let's just go ahead and just jump right into it right now because this first one I really like. This is actually from a gentleman by the name of Dan Tanis. I believe Dan's up in the Muskegon, Michigan area. And he asked this great question. How would you incorporate the idea of 3D movements within a program for a client who has a goal to be able to participate in powerlifting-based movements? Would it be more so in the warm-ups? I love a question that has an additional question to clarify it. And also, the additional question many times helps me answer the question. So we're going to assume we have an individual that wants to be better at powerlifting, that potentially even wants to compete in powerlifting, and therefore wants to be able to lift as much as they can, be as strong as they possibly can, be as safe as they can, and hopefully train for as long as they can and enjoy it. The question goes on to say, okay, when we talk about 3D movements, many times we're talking about 3D global movements. 3D maps is a great example. With just 6 movements, we can wake up every joint in our body, every proprioceptor in our body, and all 3 planes of motion. And it does kind of get us kind of going. But do those 3D movements prepare us as a warm-up for powerlifting? And better yet, how do we incorporate the 3-dimensionality of movements into allowing us to become a better power lifter? So we would say that if we had an individual that was interested in powerlifting, that one of the best ways to warm up, yes, is 3D maps. But then we basically have 3D maps for lifting, and we have 3D maps for squatting. We also have 3D maps for pushing and pulling, which the bench press would fall underneath. So what that means is before we load ourselves, before we grab a bar and start adding weight, we want to make sure that we're adequately warmed up. And therefore, we want to make sure that our squat ability is good, our ability to deadlift is good, our ability to lay down and start some bench pressing is good. And therefore, we would do that 3-dimensionally. That's a lot of fun. That's kind of a new kind of approach, but we build upon that to actually allow someone to train and to participate more effectively and efficiently and obviously more successfully in powerlifting. See if I can kind of plow us through this and share with you some thoughts and ideas. So as we know in powerlifting, there's 3 main lifts. We have the squat, we have the deadlift, and of course we have the famous bench press. And interestingly enough, these are all great lifts. We use these lifts in a lot of the things we do. Of course, we use it anytime somebody comes to us and says, I just want to get stronger. There are a number of different lifts that we do, and these are some of the core lifts that we do. However, rarely does somebody come to us and says, but I want to max out in them. And therefore, as soon as they say we want to max out in them, obviously they want to participate in powerlifting and they want to have the biggest number possible. A lot of our athletes come to us and say, I want to have some good fundamental strength so I can play basketball, so I can hit a golf ball, so I can run faster, so I can box better, so I can dance better, so I can just feel better about myself. And therefore, there's a certain approach to squatting, a certain approach to deadlifting, and a certain approach to benching that we would do. However, in this case, the individual wants to do the best they can, and therefore, how do we incorporate what we would call applied functional science and the concept of three-dimensionality and the concept of more functionality in allowing somebody to squat, deadlift, and bench better? Well, let's take the first one, the squat. The squat test obviously is in a rack, barbell backloaded, and we unload it from the rack. We squat down to a given distance that is judged to determine if we fully squatted and need to come all the way back up and lock back out. If so, we get credit for that particular squat. So the real question is, how do we then get better at it? How do we get stronger? How do we potentially use applied functional science to say, how do we understand the function of the squat and maybe get us better? Well, one technique that a lot of people already use is what we call going from back-loaded to front-loaded. Obviously, when we front-load the squat, now a little different reaction is going to happen in the body. And when we do that, we change the weight, of course. In many of these tweaks, we call them, variabilities, many of these variations, we will lighten the load, but we then will use it to actually start to progressively max out with that particular tweak as long as it's safe. Another way that we basically take advantage of this is we say, okay, your goal is when you have that weight loaded on your back, that you want to be able to squat with as much weight as possible and come back up. And of course, the best exercise for an exercise is that exercise. But if you want to do an exercise that will complement that, one way is what we call the 6-angle loaded squat. And what that simply means is we usually use dumbbells with this, and we get into our position of squat, but instead of holding the barbell behind our neck, on our shoulders, we use a dumbbell, and we actually, as we squat, we take the dumbbells forward really close to the ground without touching the ground. Now, what that is simply does is it causes us to create more hip flexion and trunk flexion and recruits more kind of those posterior chain muscles, and we're able to squat a certain amount. We then lighten that up a lot. And then we take our hands and we take them overhead, and now we squat. Now, got to be careful on this one, because as soon as I take my hands up overhead, I'm creating hip extension, back extension, and when I load into a squat, I don't have the benefit of that big back butt, big back butt, because I've actually, with my hands overhead, asked the hips to stay relatively extended. However, using that sagittal plane tweak, we can load ourselves better than when we come back to the traditional squat that's backloaded with a barbell. We find that if we incorporate that, all of a sudden we can pass the threshold we were at before and start increasing our weight. We also do that in the frontal plane. So we'll take a weight up. We can actually do this with a light barbell, but again, we use dumbbells. And we hold the weight above and a little bit to our right in the frontal plane, and we squat. Now that adds a little adduction to the one hip and abduction to the other hip. And it kind of gives what we call a feet in and feet out. Makes it a little easier on one side, a little tougher on the other side. So it allows us to train those hips and those legs and our core muscles in a different way. So when they go back to more vertical, when they go back to the way that they're expected to do it, all of a sudden these muscles say, wait a minute, I've been recruited to help you do this, and I can help you do this, and voila, I can lift more. Of course, we not only go to the right, we go to the left. We call that a frontal plane tweak. Again, lighter weight, real subtle tweak where we kind of hold it. Another huge tweak we use is the transverse plane, where now we take dumbbells and we hold them basically just kind of below waist level, and we rotate the dumbbells, in this case, all the way to our right. And while we're holding them there, we squat and we come back up. Now that's, again, that's a feet in and feet out. If I'm holding them to my right, you can sense, if you have an opportunity to stand right up now and pretend like you have dumbbells in your hand and rotate to the right, your right hip is going to be internally rotated, your left hip is going to be externally rotated. So it's an advantage to the right hip, a mechanical disadvantage to the left hip, by mechanical disadvantage. What that means is if I do that squats with that rotation right, then I do some of those squats rotation left, and I gradually build up and do that safely, and then I go back to the normal back-loaded barbell squat. Again, more muscles have been turned on because more proprioceptors have been turned on because we've done a tweak in and tweak out to facilitate the reaction. And so that's kind of a powerful, powerful way to do that. Another way we do that is with asymmetrical loading. And so what we'll do is we'll put, and again, we lower the weight, but we load asymmetrically with what we just said with the dumbbells. So we might have a 30-pound in one hand and a 20-pound in the other hand, and do some squats where our hands are forward close to the ground, and do some squats with our hands overhead, do some squats with our hands overhead a little bit to the right, then a little bit to the left on the frontal plane, take them down right around below waist level, rotate right, rotate left, and then find out kind of what our profile is, because based on one of those 6 squats, we then can gradually increase the asymmetrical load and basically build up a greater tolerance to be able to load our back, go into a squat, decelerate it, and come back home very safely. Obviously, when you do an asymmetrical load, then you switch the weight so you have the heavier weight in one hand, the lighter weight in the other hand. Probably the biggest tweak that we do that we came up with years ago, and people are very appropriately utilizing this, is we tweak the foot position. So now we can do that with our dumbbell squats we just did, and we can do that with front-loaded squats, and we can do that with back-loaded squats, but it's as simply this. If you just got into the rack and got the weight on your back and lightened up the weight, and you did your squat, you do that in what we call XXX, which means your feet are a little wider than shoulder width apart. Neither your right foot or left foot are ahead of each other. And relatively speaking, you're not really rotated in or rotated out, or what people will call toed in and toed out. And that's the safest and best way to do it. That's why that's how we get tested. However, if we want to start to create additional strength, additional reactions, and additional proprioceptive turn on, what we do is we tweak that a little bit. So we do those same squats, lighten the weight up again, and now we do it with our right foot in front. Do some squats. We then reload and do it with the left foot in front. We call that a sagittal plane tweak, or we would call that RXX or LXX. Then we basically go and say, okay, this is my normal width. I'm going to go a little bit narrower. Now a little different stress is put on my trunk and my hips and my legs. So I do some squats, and now I go wider. We call that a frontal plane tweak, or we'd call it X in the sagittal plane, W if I'm wider in the frontal plane, and if I'm narrow in the frontal plane, and then X in the transverse plane. A big one is to toe in just a pinch and toe in out a pinch. And again, these are subtle tweaks. We start really subtle to see how our body handles them. And then as we get more confident and get safer, we can tweak them up a little more. But we would actually toe in, do some squats, toe out, and do some squats. We'd call that XXI in and XXE, obviously externally rotated or toed out. Then if you want, you can combine them. I can have my right foot forward, a little wider than normal, toed out, and squat. Do the same mirror image on the left side, what we call an L, with L forward, W wide, and E externally rotated. Huge tweak to be able to squat more. So we find with competitive squatters, when they do that, obviously they go, wow, I've been drilling my body in that same path, and I thought if I stayed in the same path, I would get stronger in that path. I didn't realize that if I created a wider foundation, so to speak, a foundation that involved other reactions that are very squat-like, that I find now that I can actually squat more. And of course, we would do that, of course, to make squatting even more functional with all kinds of activities in sports. Another interesting thing we do is what we call an environment tweak or a floor angle tweak, where we tilt the floor a little bit where the floor is tilted forward about 5 degrees. All we do is get a real sturdy platform and put a 2x4 on the back of the platform. So now we're kind of leaning a little bit forward. We do the squat that way. It's a different feel. And then we put the 2x4 in front. Now our ankles are more dorsiflexed. We're tilted back a little bit, and then we do the squat. And then we put the 2x4 on the right side of the platform. I'm tilted a little bit left now. And then we put it on the left side and tilt a little bit right now. Again, when we squat with the floor angle differently, and then we come back to when the floor is flat, our body goes, wow, this is easier. And then obviously when we go to competition, it all of a sudden goes, wow, I can do it effectively tilted, but now I can actually do it with it flat more effectively, and I can lift more weight. Of course, another tweak that a lot of people do is what we call the range of the squat. In other words, do squats with minimum early range, and then kind of mid-range, and then stay deep, go deep, come back up, deep, come back up, kind of part range. So instead of doing a full range squat that competition demands that we do some initial ranges with lighter weight, then re-rack. We do some mid-ranges where we stay in the mid-range, go up and down, and then we go to deeper ranges. And interesting enough, we can use that tweak with the other tweaks that we've discussed. And of course, speed is a huge variable. We find that we self-select the speed at which we go down and squat and load and come back up, but lighten that up and then change the speed not only with your regular squat technique with the barbell in the back, but you can actually go through all the tweaks that we just discussed and tweak that with the speed. So we actually go faster than we would normally go, and of course we'd go slower than we'd normally go. This is fun because people who thought they kind of threshold out that they have a certain amount that they can squat, they go through these tweaks and quickly report that, first of all, it makes them feel overall stronger because it does recruit different forms of the muscle and more proprioceptors, but then they do indicate that it gives them this foundation that they can build upon now to actually enhance their squat. The exact same thing can be done with the deadlift. Change the foot positions. We can change the hand position. One hand that's obviously with the deadlift is an overhand grip, underhand grip, switch those. We can go wider with our grip. We can go narrow with our grip. Of course, all of the, again, foot positions that we talked about in the squat, we can do with the deadlift. Range of motion of the deadlift, we can do some initial work. The lighter weight, we can do end range work, and we can do mid-range work. We can asymmetrically load a deadlift with dumbbells. We find if we do a barbell that your body's going to seek that middle part, but if you do dumbbells, you can asymmetrically load, and you can actually recruit better muscular activity with an asymmetrical load. And of course, we can obviously do the speed as well. And again, we can change the environment, the floor angle. So the squat and deadlift have a lot of the similar kind of tweaks to it. The bench press is kind of my favorite one to tweak because a lot of people don't think about it. Now, the traditional ones, obviously, you can do an incline bench or decline bench. We get a lot of bang for our buck by doing a laterally inclined bench. In other words, we just put a small angle underneath the bench, still make sure it's stable, still make sure we don't feel like we're going to slip off it sideways. And we do our bench that way. So we elevate the left side of the bench and do some benches, and then the right side of the bench and do some benches. Another tweak that a lot of people do is go wider than normal and narrower than normal. We also do what we call a range tweak to the bench. In other words, we'll do some just coming off the chest, some initial ranges, then we'll do some mid ranges, we'll do some end ranges, and then we'll kind of combine those. And almost like just kind of different ladder approach where we go halfway up and down, then all the way up and down, then part way up, and then part way up again, and then just kind of change that up. But what we do call a thing called 3D bench. And again, we lighten the weight. You can do this with a barbell or a dumbbell. Many times we use the barbell. And what we do here is while we're on our back and we have a place that the barbell normally goes across our chest. Instead of going straight up, we basically ask ourselves, can I go up and what if I'm on my back towards my nose a little bit? We would call that a sagittal plane elevation. And then after I do a few of those, instead of going straight up, I go up and down towards my belly button a little bit. Not a lot. So you can, if you did that alternate, it would look like a V from the side. And that's what we call a sagittal plane tweak. Then what we do is we actually do, again, with lighter weight on the bar, we then do what's called a frontal plane. So as we explode up, we take the left hand and bring it up and take the right hand down. So it's almost like your small twisting of the barbell. We come back home and then we mirror that. So the right goes up and the left comes down. And so instead of going straight up, it's kind of crooked or whopper jawed, which creates a different chain reaction in our shoulders, obviously in our chest, in our core. That's quite advantageous, again, utilizing much, much lighter weight that we're going to build upon. And that makes a big difference. Of course, we're going to go asymmetrical with dumbbells when we do a dumbbell bench, and then obviously we can change the speed. Now, with bench press, if the question would have been, how do I make a bench press more functional for upright activities? That's a whole different ballgame. We can talk about that at a later date. But that's a whole different strategy. If somebody says, well, I bench, but my goal isn't to see how much I bench. My goal is to knock somebody over on a football field, where we'd say, okay, we got a whole new group of tweaks for you based on that particular demand. So hopefully that was helpful. Again, it's all about what we call the power of tweakology and applied functional science, knowing that we can change the environment, knowing that we can change the position, the driver, and the action, knowing that we can change what we call the triangulation, the height of the verticality of the lift, the direction of the lift, the distance of the lift. And of course, we have load, which is lifting is all about, the type of load, the symmetry of load, and of course, we have duration and obviously rate that we talked about. So hopefully that helps. And again, I really appreciate the question. And if I was powerlifting and I had the opportunity to have Dan train me, I think I'd be feel very blessed, simply because he does care and he just wants to know what's best for his client, for his athlete. Our second question, the person who submitted the question didn't put their name, and I wish they would have, because I wanted to get back to them and tell them, wow, this is probably one of the best questions I've heard in a long time relative to understanding human movement. And the question is simply this: what does the pelvis do in single leg and double leg loading tasks? So I kind of scratch my head and say, wow, the person asking this, I think, already knows a lot. But I think in answering a podcast can help us all learn a lot and apply it a lot. When we look at biomechanics, when we are to analyze something that somebody does, so when a patient comes to me, when a client comes to me, when an athlete comes to me and says, here's what I need to be able to do better, here's where I want to do better, we have to look at that activity and biomechanically know exactly what's happening. That's a daunting task, at least it is for me. So I learned years ago that the best way to evaluate the task is to, first of all, ask myself, what is the pelvis doing during that activity? So for example, if you work with people who come to you and say, I want to walk better or run faster or more effectively and efficiently, one of the questions we'd have to ask ourselves before we could really even train them properly is, what does the whole body do when we walk and run? Well, this particular person who asked the question kind of knew the gold of this question, because they asked this: what does the pelvis do? And so, for example, in walking, we would want to quickly say, well, when we walk and we enter into the ground with one of our feet, which that's what walking is, and let's pretend we're walking and all of a sudden the right foot strikes in front of us. We would call that a right foot transformational zone in walking in applied functional science. And the question would be, at that time, what is the pelvis doing? And the pelvis initially does basically three things, two different ways. The one thing it does is it rotates, and it does that in three planes of motion. So I'm going to go through that quick, and if you kind of want to get up and play with that, well, all you do is take a big step with your right foot and kind of get a feel for what your pelvis does. But if I enter the ground with my right foot, my pelvis is rotating to the left, and it continues to rotate to the left after my foot hits. The other interesting thing is when my foot hits, my pelvis anteriorly rotates. It rotates on itself in the sagittal plane. And the other thing is it basically laterally flexes to the left, which means when my right foot hits, the pelvis goes up on the right, but it stays lower and actually goes lower on the left. Those are what we call pelvic rotations. Interestingly enough, we also have pelvic translations. Translations is not a rotation of the bone. It's kind of how the bone slides through space, so to speak. So in walking, it's obvious that when our foot hits, our pelvis translates forward. That's the way we're going. Interestingly enough, it translates to the foot side that we're entering in on. So when my foot hits the ground, if you look at the pelvis, it's literally sliding to the right. It translates to the right. And the third translation is what we call a downward translation, or a vertical translation downward. Again, these happen because of gravity, ground reaction force, and mass momentum. Interestingly enough, when the pelvis then decides to change directions, and this is the key to this whole answer to this great podcast question, is how does that happen? And the answer is, well, that happens because movement was created because of what the pelvis did. The pelvis and movement that created chain reactions through the trunk and through the arms and through the legs creates a reaction to the proprioceptors. Proprioceptors turn on muscles, and muscles start to decelerate the pelvis, and then they load eccentrically so they can explode the pelvis to do what the pelvis was supposed to do. Wow, what did we just say? Well, the question was, what does the pelvis do during single leg and double leg loading tasks? We can certainly look at what it does when you load one-legged in walking or running or hopping, and what it does in double leg loading, such as, for instance, golf, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But the real question is why does the pelvis do that, and what can we do to take advantage of it, and what do we call it? Well, it actually is three-dimensional pelvic loading, which basically it loads and is a part of the whole transformational zone loading of an activity. But then in walking, when I decelerate that, when my right foot hits in front, rotation of the pelvis to the left, lateral flexion of the pelvis to the left, anterior rotation, translation forward to the right and down, when I finally decelerate that, I'm going to explode the pelvis in the opposite directions. And the muscles will grab that and explode that. Now, that explosion, we at Gray Institute and Applied Functional Science call that proximal acceleration. And what that is, it's a thing of beauty, because proximal acceleration allows the pelvis to take off first and then creates additional lengthening in the core and in the extremities to get a better eccentric load. So what we ultimately do becomes more passive and more effective and more efficient. That's why in a lot of Gray Institute exercises, you'll see we'll do a certain position or certain action with a certain driver, but then when we get there, then we'll actually say, and now drive the pelvis forward and back, drive the pelvis side to side, and rotate the pelvis to the right and left. What we're saying is we know biomechanically that's what happens, and we're going to reduplicate that to create the proximal acceleration, to create the additional lengthening, to actually create the reaction we want. Now, when I first kind of came upon that, even as I tried to describe it to myself, it was confusing. But let me see if I can take the confusion out of it. If you have a slingshot, and we'll call the handle piece of the slingshot the pelvis, and you have the bands coming back and you've got a stone in your slingshot. We used a lot of acorns when I was a kid. And you basically pull that back. As you pull back, just that passive energy is going to pull that the slingshot itself back. We'll call that the Y part of the slingshot. So it pulls the Y back. Interestingly enough, if you really want to explode the rock that's now in your slingshot, right before letting go, you'll take the slingshot and you'll drive it towards your target. So let's pretend I have a slingshot in my left hand. Obviously, in my right hand, I have the rubber part that and the little canvas part that holds my little rock here. And if I just pull that back and let go, there's going to be a certain amount of power. In other words, the rock's going to go a certain distance. However, if I did that exact same thing, had the same range of motion, but right before I let go with my right hand, I took my left hand and I drove it forward towards my target, you could see that immediately would give a quick stretch to the rubber band. And when I let go now, the rock's going to go much further. Well, strange enough, that's what our body does. It does that with running. It does that with down linemen when they come up. Great down linemen do proximal acceleration with the pelvis as opposed to standing up and trying to hit us. When we throw, when we dance, when we play golf. In fact, let's use golf to kind of see if we can summarize it a little bit. When I stand in golf, obviously that's a double-legged loading task. And when I drive my hands back to load myself, my pelvis, if I'm a right-handed golfer, rotates to the right. Interestingly enough, it laterally flexes to the left. The left side gets lower, the right side gets higher. And interestingly enough, it anteriorly rotates. Interestingly enough, that loading of the pelvis helps load my right hip into flexion, adduction, and internal rotation to really load my butt muscles. But let's concentrate on the pelvis. The pelvis also translates a little bit to the right. It translates down a little bit, and obviously it translates back a little bit. So there's those three translations, 3D, three rotations, and that assists me in loading my body. Now, if I then initiate the downswing with my hands without the pelvis proximal acceleration, I'm going to lose a lot of power. In fact, most of us average golfers do that. If you slow it down and you watch somebody that runs effectively, throws effectively, punches effectively, lifts effectively, and in this case, swings effectively, you'll see once their body is loaded into the transformational zone, it comes out of the transformational zone with the pelvis. In other words, they take their slingshot and they drive it in all three planes of motion towards the target. It lengthens the rubber of the slingshot, or in this case, every muscle in my body, so that when my hands passively come through, I have very fast club head speed. That's trainable. And again, the beauty of the question is that, so what does the pelvis do? We can tell you what the pelvis does in rotation and translation. An addition to that question would be, so why does it do it? And more importantly, so what do you want to do about it? Here's the key. What we do about it is when we train people in transformational zones, when we come out of it, we train them many times to rotate the opposite direction and translate the opposite direction to get that special slingshot loading so their body is more effective and more efficient in what it wants to do. Again, a little bit confusing. Just think of that slingshot, though. And next time you watch somebody effectively throw a ball or swing a club or walk or run or do a dance move or kick a soccer ball, you'll see that when they get loaded, all of a sudden they'll be loaded, but the first thing that takes off towards what they ultimately want to do is the pelvis. Because in all transformational zones, everything's usually going the opposite direction before we go the direction we want. When we jump, our pelvis is going down before it ultimately wants to go up. When I throw, my pelvis rotates away from the target before it rotates to the target. Same thing that happens in walking and running and all of other activities. So great question. I wish I could thank you personally. If you do recognize your question, please get a hold of us, as we definitely want to send you something as a way to stimulate this. So on behalf of Gray Institute, I hope you enjoyed the answer to the question relative to what in the world is the pelvis doing. And always a pleasure to share with you, and always a pleasure to share more through grayinstitute.com.
Are you looking to reconcile differences and inconsistencies in your movement education? Do you desire to know more about how the body truly functions, how it truly moves? Are you treating and training causes or just the compensations? Do you want to be able to treat or train any and every patient or client effectively? Are you looking to rejuvenate your career, enhancing your passion and purpose? Do you want to share an experience with other passionate movement professionals? If you answered yes to any of these questions, maybe you should explore GIFT, Gray Institute for Functional Transformation. It could transform your career and transform your patients' and clients' lives. GIFT provides certification in functional manual reaction as part of the 40-week mentorship program, as well as being credentialed and recognized as a fellow of applied functional science. And FAFS has the knowledge, analytical ability, and hands-on manual skills necessary for the application and integration of the core content of the GIFT curriculum, thus strategically designating you as a member of a select group of practitioners synonymous with the highest standard of care in the functional analysis of human movement. GIFT is designed for all movement professionals, including but not limited to physical therapists, personal trainers, athletic trainers, strength coaches, occupational therapists, kinesiologists, chiropractors, medical physicians, physical therapy assistants, and occupational therapy assistants. Are you ready to invest in yourself and your career in order to better invest in your patients, clients, and athletes? Check out GIFT at the Gray Institute website at www.grayinstitute.com and click on Mentorship at the top.
Doug Gray is the president of Gray Institute and the director of GIFT. Doug, as the youngest son of Dr. Gary Gray, has a unique history within the movement industry. His experience and expertise has allowed him to lead in multiple roles at Gray Institute, and his world lights up when there is any mention of his wife Valerie, his son Zion Wynn, or his daughter Lawson. This month, Doug's guest is Mike Nilson. Mike is an owner of U District PT and the head strength and conditioning coach for Gonzaga University. He played basketball for the Bulldogs during their Elite 8 and Sweet 16 runs, earning WCC Defensive Player of the Year. He's a Fellow of Applied Functional Science, FAFS, licensed sports nutritionist, NASN, and holds a master's degree in leadership. He has taken his passion for training, nutrition, and leadership and created Hoop Commitment, which is an online resource for basketball players, coaches, and parents. Mike currently sits on the board of directors for Spokane Hoop Fest, which runs the world's largest 3-on-3 tournament and the nation's largest AAU club. Mike gives talks and runs speed camps all over the West Coast, including Alaska, Arizona, California, Canada, Oregon, and Washington. In 2008, he helped create the U District Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering kids to live healthy, active lives.
All right, on behalf of Gray Institute, once again, I just want to thank everybody for listening to this episode of our podcast. And, as excited as I get to talk, I get very excited to listen. And I'm very excited to let the listeners know about this next segment that's going to feature a wonderful gentleman by the name of Michael Nilson, who, full disclosure, is a buddy of mine. He's a colleague of mine. He's also a mentor of mine. That this gentleman that we're going to present a Q&A with here upcoming in this podcast is one of those things that you're going to listen very intently, but you're just going to fall in love with this guy and just the knowledge that he brings, but just the demeanor in which he brings it. So, Michael Nilson, it's a privilege to have you on this episode of Gray Institute's podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here because obviously I love the Gray Institute, but even more importantly, I love you. So anything I could do to be able to help out the listeners, I'm game for.
Well, it's a two-way street, so I appreciate this. But now I'm going to try to set you up here, and I'm going to ask you to brag on yourself, knowing that is not who you are. You're probably one of the most humble human beings I know. But brag on yourself here a little bit and tell me, but more importantly, tell our listeners who you are and what you do.
Well, first off, I love basketball. And growing up as a kid, I love Michael Jordan. I spent countless hours in my driveway just shooting hoops. And I was lucky enough to play basketball at Gonzaga University. And, when I studied, when I was at school and studying what I wanted to do after graduation, I really didn't know just because I just loved hoops the whole time. But through that process, what I really loved was the nutrition part of basketball. How can you fuel your body to be better on the court? And, of course, the training piece. How can you jump higher, cut quicker, finish stronger? And then I love my teammates. I love being part of, a group of guys all with one mission. And so that leadership piece just really fuels my fire. And so that's what I've been doing the last 15 years is taking my love for nutrition, training, and leadership and combined it into the Hoop Commitment, which is what I do now, which is helping players, coaches, and parents improve the way they eat, train, and lead.
Wow. Well, I know there's a lot there. And when you look at who you are a living example of all of that. So immediately I want to hear what you have to say because it's not just hypothetical, but it's a proven system that you yourself have
not only implemented, but also have developed. And so when you look at the Eat, Train, Lead, the validation is more than there, knowing that you're a, licensed nutritionist, that you're a strength coach, that you're a trainer, that you're a gift fellow, and you also have a master's in leadership, that you have all the components. But it's one thing to learn the components. It's another thing to then deliver and implement the components. And that's really where I believe what you have to offer is just top notch. And the more that we can kind of get you to brag on yourself or talk more about what you do, I think our listeners are going to get even more excited about, because there's a lot of takeaways from everything that you do. And we've known each other for quite some time at this point. And, knowing that you have a conditioning background, a training background, which led you, of course, to Gray Institute, and that you were kind enough to go through our gift program in 2009. The first question I would have is, why would you embark on that 40-week mentorship program?
Well, starting out as a young strength coach, this was back in 2004. We started our business, partners in a physical therapy clinic with the two best guys in the world, Brian Cronin and Jeff Hart. And we started a business called U District Physical Therapy and Institute of Sports Performance. And so my two partners are physical therapists. I'm a strength coach. And we started this business just knowing that we wanted to help people, but we didn't really have a huge background in how to actually start a business. And being a young strength coach, there's so much to know. And my two partners were the ones that turned me on to the Gray Institute. We joined the Functional Video Digest, the Functional Rehab Network. And they said, you got to watch this video. And I popped it on, and I heard this crazy guy, Gary Gray and Dave Tiberio, talking about how the ankle is connected to the knee, and the knee's connected to the hip, and, of course, all the way up the chain. And as they're speaking, it just was this huge aha moment that this is truth. The first so many years I was studying strength conditioning, we were talking about how to train muscles. And then we have these guys coming on talking about training movement and how the whole body's a chain reaction. And I immediately just fell in love. And so from that point on, I watched every functional video digest that came on, all the FAFS functions, and I just couldn't get enough of it, because it wasn't someone's opinion. It wasn't Dr. Tiberio saying, hey, this is what I think, and he said, no, this is what science says. And based off of what science says, this is how we're applying it. And so I just kept wanting to dig deeper and deeper. And then they launched the program, the gift program, back in 2007. And I was just chomping at the bit, and I wanted to do it. But I don't know, maybe I was a little anxious, a little nervous, because at the time, I'm just a strength and conditioning coach. And my perception was, we have people from all over the world, Hong Kong, Australia, Europe, you name it. We have physical therapists and MDs and chiropractors and athletic trainers. And who am I, just a trainer, to come in? And I think there was a lot of the insecurity that held me back. But fast forward 2 years, and the drive was just too great. It was the drive to want to help my athletes and just to know more kind of outweighed that little voice in my head saying, well, you're just a trainer. And so I just made the leap. I called you up and said, I want to do this. And, of course, you were so gracious and helped me out with it. And I remember showing up to my first gift gathering. I'm just, almost talking myself out of it, kind of thinking, oh, gosh, well, what if I just stayed home and watched the videos? I was just so insecure. It was funny, because when I first walked in the room, I was greeted by Gary Gray with a big hug, and Dave Tiberio gave me a big hug, and my facilitators gave me a big hug. And I was like, it was unbelievable how you could walk in a room and just meet people for the first or second time and just feel like you're at home. And after that first day, I was just sold, not just so much for the content, which is second to none, but the community just made me feel so welcome. And it was really cool because the physical therapists wanted to know what I thought about movement as a strength coach, and the doctors and the chiropractors. And so it's just this huge community where there's no egos and everyone's sharing for the good of their athletes or for their patients or their clients. And so my only regret is that I didn't do it 2 years earlier. Really, that's the truth.
Yeah, it really is all about timing. But, what you just said had so many takeaways that I just want to kind of highlight a couple and then throw one back at you to kind of expand upon. But when you talk about gift and, that we're really reaching the entire movement industry, that, the movement industry tends to put some, titles to certain niches in the industry, being a therapist, being a trainer, being a strength coach, being a chiropractor, being a physician. But at the end of the day, when you take a step back and look at the entire picture, we're all talking about movement, and we're all talking about how the body moves and how to take someone's body and ultimately make him or her move better. And no matter what label we put on or what our specialty is, that understanding how the body moves and being able to apply that information in our own working environment is really kind of the name of the game. But the process that GIFT allows for is bringing really the best of the best in the industry to this program to not only learn, like you said, the second to none content, but where I think people really need to understand the opportunity is not only do you get the content, but you get the experience and the expertise of other movement professionals that just amplify the learning process that you can't get anywhere else. And that's where we get excited to continue to grow the program, because we know of the impact that's going out, but we also get impacted coming in by the 1,100 GIFT fellows that are out there worldwide. But what you learn throughout the process is just the gold, but what's the brighter gold is the community that GIFT consists of, which of course you are, Exhibit A, when we talk about, what type of people are attracted to GIFT, and of course what type of people that give GIFT such a great name. But another takeaway that you said is kind of the change in your thought process, where you went from training muscles to training movement. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think just kind of speaking as a strength coach, and then even kind of seeing the physical therapy world, you see, we have about 15 physical therapists that are part of U District, and kind of seeing what they're taught in school about how we want to train a hamstring or how we want to train, the pectoralis major. And a lot of times we're thinking that we're actually training this individual muscle, but then we look at how the body actually functions when their feet are on the ground, and that anatomical the idea of the anatomical anatomy where the hamstring flexes the knee only really works on the table. When I stand up and my feet are on the ground, then all of a sudden the hamstrings and everything work together with the rest of the body, and they actually can function differently. And so as a strength coach, my job is not to make my players have stronger hamstrings or stronger quads or calves. My job is first and foremost probably to make them move better, to keep them healthy and make them more efficient. But also I want to teach all those muscles how to work together to create movements like jumping and cutting and running. And so in my sport, and really in life, muscles don't act independently. They're not isolated. They're really integrated. So when I talk about training muscles, I actually want to see how that muscle integrates with the rest of the body and the functional movement that they want to perform.
Mm-hmm. Very well stated that, muscles, the way we talk about it and the way you talk about it is that muscles, frankly, aren't that bright. They just got to react. And how they react, of course, is what's going on throughout the movement and where the motion occurs at the joints. And that happens a little bit differently depending on the position that we're in. So that even though we're taught traditional anatomy, very table-based, very isolated, very one plane of motion, that that might be a prone, supine, or even sideline position, but we also have other positions that of course are more lifelike, and those are called upright, and we have both feet on the ground, one foot on the ground, and even the sitting and kneeling positions. That all of that is an environment that our body has to react a little bit differently to, depending on, of course, that powerful force of gravity. And the more we can understand what really happens, the more we can then make that happen in our training programs and our assessment programs and our strengthening programs. And that's really kind of the goal of what we want to do, is never think that we know it all, but figure out how more we can learn that's going to have dramatic application to our patients, our clients, and of course, in your world, a lot of those athletes that you get to serve. And so, not to beat a dead horse on GIFT, but we talk a lot about the professional takeaway as well as the personal takeaway from the program. Could you speak to how the program impacted you from a professional standpoint, but then also from a personal standpoint?
What's kind of funny is I would probably say the answer to both of those are pretty similar. One of the stories I like to tell about GIFT is when I showed up, I'm the head strength coach at Gonzaga University, and as I walked in, one of my fellow GIFT mates was the strength coach for University of Texas basketball. Mm-hmm. And you walk in the room, and I think from the outside you might think, oh, well, they're competitors, and so we probably want to guard the information that we have. And the environment that the gift community creates is just so different. It's so collaborative, and how can we share to go back and help our athletes? And so I get to meet Logan Schwartz, who's just the best guy in the world. And that night, we're talking shop. He's like, hey, you want to play hoops? And so next thing you know, after we spent all day in the classroom studying and getting up and practicing movement, we go to the basketball court and actually get to just hoop together. And we finish, we're all sweaty, and we're just having a good time, just chatting. And he says, hey, man, if you ever want to come down to Texas and kind of see what we do with our program, I'd love to be able to share it with you.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm thinking, are you serious? I just meet this guy. And, of course, we've been friends. We've been online for 3 months in forums and talking and sharing stuff. But I'm like, what a great experience. And so you fast forward a couple months later, and Travis Knight, he's our men's basketball strength coach, and myself, I train our women's basketball team. We fly down for a couple of days, and we hang out with Todd Wright and Logan, and it's just like they just open up the red carpet for us, and they're like, hey, this is exactly what we do. We actually brought videos of some of our athletes that we were having a hard time kind of figuring out maybe some of these movement problems that were being presented. We took some video, they analyzed it, gave us some great feedback, and we left, and we were like, we're coming back and really smarter strength coaches. And the bottom line is we were able to help an athlete, someone that was having some foot issues that may or may not have made it through the season. And because of help from other gift fellows, this guy had a great career, great professional career. And so professionally, to be able to have access to other like-minded people that are, from all over the world that are just going to say, hey, yeah, come down, come check out and see how we apply it, is just second to none. And really, is that professional or is that personal? Well, you got to decide that, because just about a week ago, I was texting Logan, hey, man, how you doing? And we're just as friends, being able to kind of chat. And so I would say the knowledge is second to none, which helps the professional career, but the personal side really helps the professional career, because what you learn in a textbook is totally different than flying down to Texas, walking in the weight room and being able to see how they treat their athletes, how they assess. I tell everyone, if you're interested in gift, you have to be able to talk to people that have done it and find out how it's impacted their professional career and their personal life, because it's the best thing, bar none, I've ever done for continuing education in the last 15 years.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It is a powerful program, and of course I'm very biased about it, but you definitely want to be biased about things that you believe in, and I believe in it because of the impact, and it's those success stories that you just shared that really firms up my belief in the program. And gift is for a lot of people. It's been a game changer for so many professionals, but it's not right for everyone as well, and we fully respect that and understand it. But as with everything that Gray Institute teaches, the thread of applied functional science is in everything that we do. And with applied functional science, it's really, of course, just taking the truths that have already been proven and applying that into our working environment for the benefit of our patients, our clients, our athletes, our individuals. And so for our listeners, you've already given us so many nuggets of information, but I'm going to put you on the spot here. That what is one of the biggest pearls of applied functional science that you could share with us?
Okay, well, this could be a long list, but I'm going to kind of go to one, which is the PST process. And to me, this was the biggest game changer, because in the world of movement, especially now with social media, you can get lost in the variety of options and tools and techniques to be able to train your clients. And sometimes, for me, it really is overwhelming. Sometimes you pop on Instagram and you're seeing thousands of different variations of these movements, and they all look so cool, and the next one's flashier than the other, and of course your athletes love them. But you get inundated with all these different options, and then you go from that to being paralyzed, like, okay, which one do I choose? And the PST is this huge anchor to say, all those techniques are great, but before we can really look at the technique, let's look at the P, which is the principle. That's the foundation. That's the truth, the things that never change, right? Now, our understanding of the truth might change, but the truth never changes. And that's what the Gray Institute does a phenomenal job of, is just anchoring to those principles, things like gravity, ground reaction force, mass and momentum, 3 planes of motion. And we just spend so much time really understanding those truths And then from there, this is where the magic is now can we create strategies based off of those truths that are going to be able to kind of direct our action or the way that we care for our athletes. And so we have these truths, the principles that drive your strategies. And once you have a really good strategy lined up, the techniques don't really matter. Those are endless. And once you go pop on Instagram and you have the PST process in mind, all those techniques make a lot of sense because you can put them in different buckets. You know, it doesn't seem like it's this mad chaos of, oh man, there's BOSU balls and mini bands and step-ups and multi-directional lunges. With the PST process, it gives us this nice organization to make sense of all the madness. And so for me, that was the first time I really felt like I could breathe. You know, I'd be able to go on social media or go down to Texas and see what Todd and Logan are doing and say, oh, I love it. Here's their strategy. Now I like that technique, but I'm actually going to change it because the athlete that I'm working with is different. You know, and the technique really doesn't matter, but I wanted to really know their thought process, the strategy, how they were taking those truths and creating something that could be able to apply to all athletes. So, make a long story short, that PST process, I think, might be the goal of the program.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because, you know, it's really all about the process, and that can go multiple ways, you know, the process of learning in general, that we believe that our learning should never stop. It's really kind of what we owe back to our profession, to keep learning, to keep growing, to keep making the impact that's being made. But also with the process when it comes to movement, that you know, we don't hang our hats on protocols at Gray Institute. We hang our hats on a process, as you delicately put. It's the principle, strategy, technique process that applied functional science allows us. And as you mentioned, it kind of allows us to kind of sift through, you know, current techniques, traditional techniques, future techniques, and trying to decide what's going to be the best technique for that individual. You talk a lot about, you know, some pieces of equipment or different type of environments, and it reminds me of a saying that we like to say around these parts here at Gray Institute, and that there's a drastic difference between the imprisonment of the tool using you versus the empowerment of you using the tool. And that all stems back to that PST process to say, based on science, strategically, I'm going to use that principle to develop these type of techniques because the hamstrings don't function on a table. They function upright, and they really start to get excited when my knee's bending and my hip's bending, and then more importantly, when my knee and hip is moving in the frontal and transverse plane. And if that's not how we're assessing, if that's not how we're training, if that's not how we're strengthening, then we're kind of missing the point on what science has already proven to be so true. So the PST process is the big takeaway from applied functional science, and I appreciate you explaining a little bit more in greater detail that amazing pearl. You know, as we kind of come to a conclusion here with our podcast segment, I want to continue to give you the floor and circle back to how I began this and allow you to brag on yourself again, because you mentioned a couple things. One up front, you mentioned something about a hoop commitment that I would really like you to allow our listeners to know more about that, more importantly, where they can find out more information, because I'm already kind of salivating on this end because, you know, my passion is basketball. And knowing that you have so many resources for me and for the other professionals at hoopcommitment.com, I want our listeners to hear more about where they can learn more information on that. And then you also talked about, you know, your colleagues and your partners and Mr. Cronin and Mr. Hart at U District PT. I would love for our listeners to hear a little bit more about what U District PT is all about and how they can find out more information. So talk to us more about the Hoop Commitment as well as U District PT.
Oh, thanks so much, Doug. The foundation of all of it is U District PT. So you can go to udistrictpt.com, and we do physical therapy, sports performance training. We have mental health. We have counseling. We have a nonprofit, which is designed to kind of promote health and wellness in our youth in Spokane. So if you're in the Spokane area and you're looking for any kind of movement professionals, you have to come to to U District. And we actually have a contract with Gonzaga to train all the athletes. So we're the exclusive strength and conditioning providers for Gonzaga University. And through U District, I started a program called Hoop Commitment. And so, yeah, thank you so much. I love it. If you're interested in basketball, whether you're a player, a coach, or a parent, go to hoopcommitment.com, and it hopefully is going to be the one-stop shop for people that want to improve the way they eat, the way they train, and then the way they lead on the basketball court. and I'm actually launching a podcast tomorrow. And so I would love it if you guys want to check it out. I'm actually having probably, in my eyes, the best movement professional in the nation that's going to be coming down and is going to be interviewed. And his name is Doug Gray. I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but I got the inside track, and we're going to bring you on, Doug, to talk about how you see movement for basketball. And so thank you so much for having me on your podcast, and even more thanks for coming on my podcast. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're very, very kind. And by the time I think the listeners are going to be hearing this podcast, that if they go to hoopcommitment.com, they'll be able to access that podcast. But we're also going to be launching the Hoop Commitment podcast that's featuring myself to our database so that they can continue to hear more about how we view applied functional science and basketball going hand in hand. But you know, I can be very corny, as you know, Mr. Nilson, and as a lot as my family and friends know. But, you know, just by what you're talking about made me think of if you go to a play and that what you see are these amazing actors and actresses and performers that just create an experience that's second to none, that's kind of hard to describe unless you were there. But when you look at all the behind the scenes work, when you look at the orchestra, when you look at the director, when you look at the stage people, that nothing happens without that full team. And you know, you mentioned that you've had a huge hand in what's going on at Gonzaga, and of course, you being one of the prototypical players that are the most hardest working, a huge, we before me when it comes to team. That, you know, I would encourage our listeners to look more into the Mike Nilson story, because you've lived the dream, but you earned the dream, and that dream has continued to inspire so many people on so many levels. But it's no coincidence that U District PT is connected with Gonzaga when you look at the athletics and how they've just went to that upper tier across the nation in all their sports. That it's no coincidence that there's an AFS link specifically by you and your colleagues at U District PT. And I just want that to be noted, that you know what you guys have done, what you gals have done is really making an impact. But that doesn't just happen overnight. That takes a lot of experience and expertise that you guys have put blood, sweat, and tears into making a university so successful. But that's what you do, not only with the athletes, but with your patients and your clients that U District PT gets to reach out to. So keep doing what you're doing, because you're definitely doing it more than right, and it's inspiring. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to jump on our podcast and to share with our listeners, just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to your knowledge, because, you know, we would love to do this podcast for hours and hours and hours, and it would not lose any flavor because of what you bring to the table. But what you brought to the table here on this episode, I just want you to let you know how much we appreciate it, how much we respect and admire you, Mike Nilson, and just what an impact you're making near and far. So thank you so much.
I feel the same way. Thank you so much. Like I said, I love Doug Gray, and I love the Gray Institute. So thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for hearing the wisdom of Michael Nilson. Definitely check out hoopcommitment.com. Check out U District PT. But the more you can learn about this guy and what he's doing, I think we'll have dramatic parallels into what we're trying to do on a day-to-day basis. So this will conclude this segment. Thank you, Mike Nilson, and thank you, listeners.
Chain Reaction is coming to a city near you this fall. Enroll today. Chain Reaction is a live seminar for any and all professionals that desire more tools in their toolbox to better serve their patients, clients, and athletes in the areas of prevention, performance, and rehabilitation. Delivered by Dr. Gary Gray, the father of function, and Doug Gray, this 2-day experience teaches how the body moves functionally versus traditionally. Whether you are new to the industry or seasoned, this seminar delivers information that you must know if you really want to deliver individualized training and treatment. Ask yourself, are you needing CEUs and wanting to make sure there is carryover to your everyday working environment? Are you seeing a gap between how you are traditionally taught and what really happens with movement? Do you want a seamless way to assess movement functionally and program individually? Do you want to experience an encouraging and empowering seminar learning directly from the father of function, Dr. Gary Gray? Do you know what causes an ACL tear, a labral tear, or back pain? Do you know how to prevent or rehab the above injuries and dysfunctions? Chain Reaction is being presented in San Diego this fall 2019. Check it out at www.grayinstitute.com or on Facebook.
This is John. Thanks for joining us here on the Gray Institute podcast. At Gray Institute, our goal is to do one thing the best we can, and that is to help you become the go-to movement professional. If you have a question for future podcasts or questions about anything Gray Institute offers, including education, live or online specializations, or mentorships, please email us at info@grayinstitute.com. If we use your question on air, we will send you some cool stuff. Be sure to look for our next podcast coming soon. Have a great day.